Hello everyone. Today I'm taking a look at the Protectli Vault Pro VP2430. Now this is their new model featuring an Intel N150 CPU and 4 Intel i226 2.5 gigabit network cards. So for those of you that haven't heard of Protectli before, they're a US-based company that manufactures and sells these guys here. These are mini PCs designed as appliances. So they're not trying to make mini desktops, none of that stuff. These guys are designed to be a router or a server for home or small business. So they focus a lot on networking. These guys have 2.5 gig NICs, of course. These guys also have a ton of expansion. Internally, we have an M.2. We can do 2.5 inch SATA drives. They have M.2 Wi-Fi and M.2 cellular modem support, all in this one box and all at the same time. Now, I didn't get a cellular modem to test, but I'll make sure to test the rest of it today. So, if this mini PC running OPNsense sounds good to you, then come along on this adventure. Quick disclosure here, Protectli sent me this unit for review and let me configure it with their configurator how I chose. So I chose a relatively low-end spec in terms of storage, but high in terms of memory, which is what's great for a router like OPNsense. If you were to build, say, a virtualization server with Proxmox, you'd probably choose very different things. But no money changed hands. They won't see the review until you do. And come on, let's unbox this thing. Whoop. Oh, it's kind of chunky. It's passively cooled, so. Okay, quick start guide with a QR code. Nice. They've got port reference labels. So these are all common operating systems and how they will come up and be shown, which I think is really nice to see. If we zoom in there, we can see stuff like ENP, ENO, etc. WAN, LAN, opt. Oh, these sheets are actual stickers too. So depending on what operating system you're using, so in my case I'm using OPNsense, so I would take the opt through WAN LAN stickers, which is this first row here, and I could stick them on the device. But if I was using something else, I mean, they've got a whole bunch of options here, if you can see them all. So these are the naming conventions for ETH. IGC would be FreeBSD, ENP would be Linux. They've got some example IP addresses, lag, bridge. So really helpful sticker sheet here. And of course, the box itself. So these guys are USB 2, HDMI display port, USB 3, that's a Type C. This is a USB COM port, so you plug it in and it shows up as a serial port. Then you can get to the debug console. And on the back side, we got the 4 Ethernet jacks. These are Intel i226, and we have a threaded barrel jack, so you can't accidentally unplug it. They also have a SIM card slot. I didn't get it with a 4G, 5G module, but they have those available. And then they also have, if you get a wireless card or a 4G or 5G card, they have antenna spots here too. And of course, the whole thing is passively cooled, so you got this massive heatsink on top, more antenna options on the sides, so if you want to populate antennas, you got plenty of space for it. Power brick, channel well technology. It's got all the ratings there. 12 volt, 5 amp, 60 watt. Excellent. And of course, here's that threaded locking barrel jack, so you don't accidentally unplug it. Looks like I've got a SATA cable in case I want to install a SATA drive, which I don't, but it's nice that it came with it. And a mounting plate if you want to mount this to a wall or with a base mount. So they have a couple different choices for pre-installed operating systems here. They'll pre-install OPNsense Firewall, XCP-NG virtualization environment, or Ubuntu Desktop. So these are all open source projects that a lot of people run on their home labs and small businesses, and so you can get them pre-installed. So I have the mini KVM in case I need to go over HDMI, but I'm going to try the USB Type-C COM port. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so looks like we got an FTDI FT230X. Let's go ahead and do that. That is very much a wrong baud rate. Okay, so we are on core boot on our Intel N150 here. This is all through the serial port too, so I don't even have to hook up a thing. Okay, so we can device management. Am I running secure boot? No. So in the spirit of testing this thing like my other mini PC reviews, I'm going to boot standard Ubuntu desktop just to run through some basic tests. Okay, so I realized I'm booting up a desktop operating system here, Ubuntu. So I actually had to plug in HDMI for this. The serial COM port was not going to do a desktop. But I'm in Ubuntu, we can take a look at PCI topology. So as expected, we have 4 Intel i226V. These are 2.5 gig NICs, and we have a Phison NVMe controller. Now just a reminder, this is an Intel N150 CPU. So in the CPU guy here, we have 9 PCIe lanes to work with. So these guys are PCIe Gen 3, 9 lanes total. Okay, first i226, he is running at 5 gigatransfers by 1. So 2.5 gig NIC, 5 gigatransfers, that's PCIe Gen 2, 1 lane. That's exactly what the i226 supports, so it's just connected straight onto the CPU. And same thing for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Okay, so Phison NVMe controller, this guy is running at PCIe Gen 3 by 2 lanes. So our M.2 slot is not blazing fast. It's PCIe Gen 3 by 2 lanes. Now this isn't terrible. Remember, we only have 9 lanes to start with on the CPU. We gave 4 of them to our 2.5 gig NIC because we want to build a good router. That leaves 5 lanes left. So we gave 2 of those to our M.2 because storage isn't quite as important in a router. And I believe some of the other ones go to a Wi-Fi slot and a WWAN slot, like a 4G, 5G modem slot. So I guess we'll find those when we open it up. But currently, we got 6 lanes accounted for, the 4 2.5 gig NICs, and the 2 for the M.2 slot. I'd also like to point out that just sitting here, I'm only using 6.5 watts. Now that is pretty good for one of these mini PCs. Now, one of the neat things about having high-speed 2.5 gig and 10 gig switches in the home lab, aside from being able to hear them in the background right now, is that I can hook all 4 ports of this guy up at 2.5 gigs to 4 virtual machines and have them run speed tests between each other. So these guys are Intel i226 2.5 gigabit NICs. That means that each NIC can handle 2.5 gigabits bidirectionally, so symmetric. 2.5 gig in, 2.5 gig out. So that means, in theory, I could have 20 gigabits per second worth of packets coming either in or out of this box. So if that were a server, that'd be a hell of a lot of bandwidth. This is a router, though, running OPNsense, so I can get 10 gigabits per second of throughput, because traffic has to go in one interface and come out another. So I set up 4 VLAN interfaces in OPNsense, well, 3 VLANs and 1 untagged. Those are hooked up to my switch on 4 VLANs on the switch. I've got those hooked up to 4 virtualization instances somewhere in my environment here, and I'm running iPerf. And so I should be able to expect bidirectional 2.5 gig from my pairs. So I got a pair on that system, iPerfing to a pair on that system. I got 2 test pairs. And currently they are getting a whopping 2.09 gigabits per second averaged across all 4 streams. So it's bidirectional, 2 bidirectional tests at the same time. You're getting 2.04 and 2.09 gigabits per second. That is pretty darn good. So that's with this guy doing firewalling. I added just a couple firewall rules that say like allow pretty much everything. But it's doing state tracking, it's doing firewalling, and it's able to run basically line rate, and it's not even warm. Now I am very glad to see that because it means Intel has fixed their problems with the i225. So this guy has the newer i226, which actually in hardware will tell you it's an i225 stepping 4, because Intel had a lot of bad instability problems with the i225 in the early days, like the Rev 1, Rev 2 steppings. I have another box, also from Protectli, with the Rev 3 steppings, and that one occasionally gave me some instability problems. If you watch my video where I tested VPNs, I was running that on Linux, and it was not happy. Seems like Intel's fixed that problems. Protectli has made a choice to use Intel network cards in their hardware, primarily for the users of FreeBSD-based appliances, specifically OPNsense. So on the OPNsense world, in the FreeBSD world, network card support is not the same as it is on Linux. So using a brand that has good FreeBSD support is really important. And that basically means Intel. Intel has good FreeBSD drivers, including the i225, i226. So by using Intel-based 2.5 gig NICs, Protectli has made this work very well with OPNsense. The downside of that is that the Intel NICs historically have been very good, but in the 2.5 gig generation they were not very good. So sorry to those people that use Linux that couldn't use a Realtek NIC. Funny saying a Realtek NIC was better, but in the 2.5 gig generation it pretty much was. Really in the 2.5 gig generation what you really wanted was an Aquantia NIC, the Quanta Action AQC family. Those guys are fantastic. They're mostly 10 gig NICs, so they also have 5 gig and 2.5 gig, but nobody uses those hardly. But good NICs. So i225s, i226, working well. I'm able to do line rate through this guy in OPNsense. I've got it all hooked up to my test bench here. And I mean, I can hold my hands on it. It's barely warm to the touch. And it is currently drawing 11 watts. What if I start some more iPerf tests again? Does it go up? Start you again, start you again. Now my switch is making noise, and this guy is drawing 23 watts. And I have to listen to my switch in the background, passing these 10 gigabits of traffic. 20 gigabits through the switch, actually. So, yeah, it's fun. So, time for a bit of a teardown. Now, it's actually quite easy to open this. So I got screws in the back, 4, I got screws in the bottom, and I got screws in the front. So I'm going to take the bottom screws off, because hopefully I can get access to everything just from here. We're stuck. Nope, we're definitely stuck. Okay, can take off one side. So we're going to take off, that's got a nut on it. This one doesn't, so we'll take off this side. Okay. What are we stuck to on the bottom? Oh yeah, that's, I think we're just stuck to thermal gap pad on the bottom, and I think if I just pull on it, come right off. Oh wow, that's quite a heat sink. So, I got a massive machined chunk of aluminum here, which looks like might also be a 2.5-inch drive bay looking by the looks of it. So it looks like they have added this absolutely chonker heatsink here that cools, if I flip it back over, this guy cools the memory, and this guy cools the M.2 SSD. So that is quite a thermal dissipation for those guys. And then the rest of the unit, so it looks like we've got 2 M.2s here. These are both different keys, and then this one's a third key. So one of these will be our Wi-Fi card, one of these will be our cellular card. Third M.2 is the storage, which they have different options for. We got an onboard SIM slot that will pass through to the WN card. 1 stick of RAM. Looks like that is real crucial RAM, 16 gigs DDR5. By the way, the Intel N150 only has 1 memory channel. Well, it's like 2 half channels in DDR5, but 1 memory channel, so that's why we get 1 stick here. Also looking around here, so that's our power button, that's our reset button, that's our COM port. So that would be our Type-C, HDMI, DisplayPort, USB. Moving around the board a little bit. Looks like we actually have some front panel I/O buttons in here. So this is labeled Power LED, Power Switch, Reset, Hard Drive LED. So I guess you could put this in your own case if you wanted. I think it's a CMOS clear jumper. It's labeled COM2. It's a serial port. This one's labeled ESP. I don't know what that one is. These two are power and SATA if you want to put in a 2.5-inch drive. There is a TPM jumper here. You have options for a fan if you need it, but we obviously don't need a fan. And the board itself actually says Protectli right there. So this is as far as I go with the teardown. The bottom of this is going to have the CPU heat sunk to the big giant metal chassis. I don't want to pull that off because I still want this thing to work properly without me having to reapply heatsink and stuff. So, enjoy the insides. Okay, so what do I think of the Vault Pro VP2430? Well, I have some of their other vaults actually already. So my own house runs a Protectli FW4B, it's their older FW series. That's in the closet there, and it's been running that way for 4 or 5 years now. And that one's only a gigabit model, obviously. It's an Intel i219 NIC, and it's been running just fine. I have another one of their vaults, the FW4C, which is a 2.5 gig version of the same one. And I had some problems with that one if you watch my VPN video, running with the Intel i225 NICs. And that had some early generation i225s, which was actually entirely Intel's fault. Nothing to do with Protectli. Intel just made some bad NICs, which Surprisingly, in that generation, Realtek was better. But anyway, Intel has fixed their issues now with this guy. This is quite a lot more powerful than the FW4C I had. So if you looked at my OpenVPN video, or my WireGuard video, the VPN video, I was on the FW4C, and it was definitely CPU bound doing all those things. This guy is a lot more powerful with the N150. It's a modern processor, DDR5 memory, 2.5 gig NICs, efficient power consumption, all that good stuff. So this is just sitting here in front of me, running BSD. It's doing 7.8 watts. Under Linux, it was down in like the 6 watt range with nothing hooked up. With all the interfaces alive, not really sending much data, but active, that bumped it up to about 11 watts, which 2.5 gig is not the most power efficient, so it makes sense. And fully loaded, it was peaking at about 20 watts or so. Very reasonable to me for a router. I mean, this guy was doing 10 gigabit throughput. The build quality of this is fantastic. There's a lot of screws visible from the outside, and you can remove pretty much all of the panels individually. As you saw in the teardown, I had a hard time getting the bottom off. That was just because of the thermal pads were sticky, which is what thermal pads do. So I got it off, and pretty happy with it. The cooling solution seems more than adequate for being a router. So I ran it at full routing load for quite a long time, and it's just barely warm. I mean, I'm holding my hand and it's very comfortable. So it's not heating up at all. It's very happy. Now, as for expandability, this guy has a Wi-Fi slot and a cellular slot. I didn't use either of those because I don't use those with OPNsense, but I'm heavily considering getting a 4G, 5G modem for this guy and turning him into like a travel router. I'm doing some traveling soon, and having a travel router like this would be pretty nice. So that might be where this goes in the future. I'm not sure if OPNsense would be the right operating system for that, but I can always run Linux, of course, if I have to. So talking pricing, I went into their configurator here, and if I max out the memory, 64 gigs of DDR5, and max out the M.2 at 4 terabytes M.2, I get a total of $743. That's quite a bit. Now that is not the spec that I chose. Since I built this out as the perfect OPNsense rig, 64 gigs would not make sense, and neither would 4 terabytes. So I chose a much more reasonable 16 gigs of RAM, which is still a lot for OPNsense, and a 256 gig SSD. Now you probably could go down to 8 gigs and be absolutely fine with this much bandwidth, but I was thinking about running things like NTOP-NG, and that needs quite a lot of RAM for some of its back-end stuff. It's not as bad as like that blocker software video up here, but yeah, I mean, some of these plugins take a lot of resources. Basic routing doesn't really though. So with my spec, 256 gig NVMe boot drive, not doing a lot on a firewall, and 16 gigs of RAM, it came to $385. And I think that's an extremely reasonable price. I mean, the other price was reasonable for what it was. I just way over configured it for an N150. So that's a bare bone price of $299 with no storage or RAM. If you want to bring your own storage and RAM, that's the base price essentially. Another thing I don't think I mentioned heavily earlier is that this guy runs an open source bootloader. So they have the option to choose between AMI, American Megatrends, or Core Boot, open source. So I'm a big fan of open source, of course, so I chose Core Boot just to try it out. And I was very happy with it. I didn't have any issues. There's hardly any options to configure anything, which is not great. So maybe there would have been more options in AMI, but Core Boot is working fine. I got the COM port. I can access all the BIOS setup utilities from the COM port, which is super cool, or from HDMI or DisplayPort, but yeah, that's Core Boot. Now, these guys do have 32 gigs of eMMC on board. So if you just are doing something very basic, like say OpenWRT, you can install that on the 32 gig eMMC and not pay the $33 for 256 gig M.2. I personally would not do that. Netgate, the company that does pfSense, they have sold some units that are eMMC only, and they have worn out very rapidly. I would be very concerned about using eMMC for anything more than like just a pure operating system drive. So like a lot of operating systems do boot up off the drive, and they run a lot of logs and stuff. If you run any plugins in OPNsense, they're pretty much going to be generating a lot of data. If you like analytics plugins like ZenArmor, or ZenArmor uses a ton of disk space. I like NTOP-NG, that one uses a lot of disk space too. That's not for eMMC. Overall with this guy, I am really happy with it. So in terms of the other mini PCs I've reviewed, none of them are as easy to tear down as this. All the screws are exposed and ready to go. These guys support Core Boot, which is really cool to me to see open source BIOS. The COM port, the 2.5 gig NICs. This guy's clearly designed to be an appliance, and like a network appliance at that. It's not trying to be a desktop. It's not trying to mount on your desk or look pretty or anything. It's trying to be very functional, and I think it's very functional. So thanks for coming along in this video. If you want to chat with me more about this, I actually have an upcoming project for this guy specifically. He's going to go with me on a bit of a travel, so that's why he might get a cellular modem. I guess we'll see about that if you want to subscribe or chat with me on Discord or whatever about that. I also have a Ko-fi if you guys want to give me a tip. I really appreciate that. And it's kind of like Patreon, but it's only a one-time thing. So yeah, I guess I'll see you guys on the next adventure.